Welcome to Sports, Clicks, and Politics with your hosts, Ben Hussong and me, Shawn Hannon. Welcome to episode 30 of Sports, Clicks, and Politics. We've made it.
It's exciting.
Yeah, I don't know. 30, last show of 2020.
Good riddance.
Yeah. I mean, we had a lot to talk about, but I'm not really I mean, it allowed for content, right?
I mean, listen, if 2020 didn't happen, I don't know that we would have actually done this.
Right, exactly right. So
2020 was sort of what allowed us to, like, we talked about this for months, and then it was COVID in 2020 that actually allowed us to do this.
Yeah, and there was a bunch of news, and obviously here we are. So I want to thank everybody for making it to the end of 2020. Congratulations.
Good job.
We no meteor yet. Still got a few days.
Fingers crossed. But listen, I'm really looking forward to December 32nd of 2020 because I'm pretty sure that's going to happen just based on how this year has gone.
The Mayan calendar somehow.
Right.
Something.
It's going to happen.
That'll be fun.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
How was your weekend personally? Any exciting news? Anything show-worthy?
I mean, not really. It was Christmas, so we had a wonderful Christmas Eve. Wonderful. It was funny every year on Christmas Eve. My family and I get Chinese food. We do a little family movie.
Wait, you're
family
Jewish?
Game. What's that?
You're Jewish?
Partially.
Because my significant other is part of one of the tribes.
See, she's
So
one of the chosen.
Yeah, I'm part of the. I'm in the know a little bit.
I am now too because my youngest son, Brett, has decided that we are now going to be celebrating Hanukkah as well as Christmas. His big Christmas gift that he had asked for was a mensch on the bench. So we got a mensch on the bench. And now he says, we were talking to some family out of town Christmas night, and I brought this up to him and said, yeah, Brett's going to now celebrate Hanukkah. And Brett was sitting right there, who's 7 years old. And I think they were trying to get him a little bit. They asked, like, oh, really, Brett? So what's Hanukkah all about? Son of a gun, if that kid didn't explain it to him about, like, there was an army that was coming
Nice.
And they had to hide in this place and they had a candle that was only supposed to last one. Went through the whole story. They all started laughing. They're like, okay, so he knows. Like, oh, yeah, no, he's on board. He's serious.
Nice. Well,
So, yeah,
in similar fashion, I have a Christmas tree, multiple Christmas trees technically, and some stockings hung by the chimney with care by my Jewish girlfriend. So here we are.
I'm telling you. We're all about acceptance and inclusion over here.
All right, so let's go into sports a little bit. We had I know I'm sure you didn't jump into the NBA as I did the first few days here, but I will just make a brief, quick comment that the Brooklyn Nets are legit.
How are they not going to be?
Well,
That's
I mean,
so much
listen,
talent.
Sure, but they had all these pieces last year that they got into the playoffs. Their coach was probably, I feel like, the main reason they did. They replaced him. And obviously you get these two gigantic pieces of Durant and Irving at full health and full strength, and they look really, really good. So, all right. Well, your Bills play tonight.
Heck yeah, they do.
The Patriots. You're not playing for anything anymore, right?
I don't think so. I think the only thing that can happen is they could either be the second or third seed.
So it's just home field against the Steelers if it happens to be the Steelers.
Correct. That would be it. So I think that, listen, it's New England. You always want to take them seriously. And I always, even as I'm objective as I can be as a football fan, anytime you're playing a division game, anything can happen.
Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah, they know each other. I mean, obviously there's things happen here. So
that's what, when I used to bet on football, that was one of my rules is I never bet division games because I always thought there's too many coin tosses. There's too many weird things that happen.
Similarly, I would like to play fantasy with interconference games because they don't know anybody about each other. There's always usually high scoring. So
right. And that's where the only time I would bet a conference game was if there was more than a 10-point underdog. I would always take the points.
And when the Packers play the Vikings this year, because the Vikings are terrible. But anyway, that's a different story.
That's another time.
Let's go. I mean, I don't know. Did you watch much football over the weekend?
I did, actually.
So did you get to see the Steelers? They finally got off the snide there a little bit.
They put together a good half of football.
Yeah. And they beat a good team. So,
yes.
Good thing I put the Browns in the Power 5 last week, just because. So they got their thing.
To be fair, So it turns out the Jets can beat a playoff team as long as that playoff team is not allowed to have any wide receivers.
Yeah.
And
I mean, technicality.
Right. And listen, not for nothing. Why were they doing anything but handing the ball off the entire game against that team?
Yeah, and I didn't watch any of that game, so I don't know the answer to that, but it was ugly early. I mean, the Jets were up, I think, like 20-3, and they made it close down the stretch, but I don't know. The Browns are no longer in the Power 5, let's just say that. So
that's deserved.
They're still holding on to playoff possibilities. The Steelers win did clinch the division, so they are either going to be the 2 or the 3 seed as well. So they're basically the other with the Bills. And then we kind of have a mishmash at the bottom of who's in and who's not. And I don't know. There's still a lot of good teams, and the culture on the outside looking in now. We get this extra team in the playoffs this year in both conferences, so that kind of opens up one additional team here. But somebody with 10 wins is not going to get in the AFC, which is crazy.
Yeah, even with an expanded playoff field, they're not going to get in.
Yeah,
it's nuts.
And in the NFC, I don't know, are the Cowboys now the team? I think we've flipped every week for the last 4 weeks of who's the team in the NFC East, and I think it's the Cowboys now.
Might be the most exciting divisional race going on in all of football right now, with a combined 20 wins between all 4 teams.
Yeah, well, three of their teams are still vying for playoff contention. So
That's it.
Yeah, right. So
it's exciting
the NFC East.
Listen, you joke, but it is kind of exciting.
No, it's clearly impactful. I mean, let's see, who do they got these coming up here? Who do they play each other in the final weeks here?
The Giants, I want to say, play the.
I got Cowboys play the Giants. There you go.
Yeah.
So Cowboys win. They'll need to win, and then the Redskins, I'm guessing, are playing the Eagles. Yeah, I don't see that.
I think they play.
I felt like that everybody ended with division games this year. Yeah, football's the Eagles, so they're all in division. So. Yeah, no, exciting is definitely appropriate. Quality is probably not the right word to put with that, but
no, they stink this year for sure. They're awful.
Nobody's in my Power 5. The Power 5 consists of, I'm sure, virtually unchanged in the top 4. So, I just added the Steelers in instead of the Browns this week. So I got my Steelers back in the Power 5. But it starts with the Chiefs, then I got the Packers, then I got your Bills, and then I got the Saints, and then my Steelers.
Listen, I think that's an accurate representation of where we are right now. I think people overreacted immensely to the Steelers, dropping them down to like 9 or 10. I get it; they're not.
I mean, they lost
best.
to the Bengals.
They did lose to the Bengals.
And they did. They had all the receivers.
Division games, you never want to take a gamble on because you just don't know what's going to happen.
I get it.
So I don't disagree with anything in there. I think the Bills and the Packers, you could make an argument for flip-flopping, but I couldn't make a strong argument that the Packers are noticeably worse than the Bills, and I couldn't make an argument that the Bills are noticeably worse than the Packers. Yeah. I think the Chiefs are clear-cut number 1. Somewhere in the next is the Packers, Bills, Saints, and then I think the Steelers are the team after that. That's how I look at it, is if I'm doing groupings.
Yeah.
And I think once you get out of there, I think the Steelers have some serious holes that they're going to have to overcome a lot in the playoffs because they
can't run the ball.
They can't run the ball. They lost too many guys on defense. It's going to be a problem. So I don't think they're in that top level. I think that would be a surprise. The Chiefs should win the Super Bowl. I think any way they don't.
Did you have any concerns? Did you see any of the Chiefs play the Falcons? Right.
I mean, I didn't have to because I saw that the Falcons were winning going late in the game, and I knew the Chiefs had them right where they wanted them. Because if there's any way that the Lions, oh God,
they find a way.
The Falcons were gonna. They might be the most fun team to watch right now because of how creatively they lose games.
Yeah.
They got a 39-yard field goal to tie the game. Nah.
Yeah. No, let's not play spoiler. Let's not try to make a. I mean, listen, it's probably better for their draft pick status. I mean, I think they're third. I think now. I think the Jaguars have secured the overall first pick now. So
they have.
Congratulations, Trevor Lawrence, by getting a Florida no income tax state versus the Jets and the income tax state. So well played, Trevor Lawrence.
Now, before we go into the bottom 5, we have to take a minute to talk about my guy, Ryan Fitzpatrick.
The Magic Man.
I love this dude. Honest to God. It's amazing what he is able to do. That game was nuts.
Yeah, it was great. I was watching it, and, the last 2 minutes? There was
the
3
last
lead
4 minutes, there was
3 lead
5
changes.
scores. 2 touchdowns, 3 field goals in the last 4 minutes of the game. 4 minutes and 1 second. Listen, having a rough day, not anything overly bad, just couldn't do anything to get them going. Every pass was a 3-yard dump off, and he wasn't having a good day. So give Brian Flores, the head coach of the Dolphins, credit, because it's not like Tua threw a bunch of picks. It's not like he was getting abysmal, but he looked at it and said, you don't have it today. Let's bring in the beard. So they bring in Ryan Fitzpatrick. The spark is lit.
Not James Harden.
No, well.
The other beard?
The original beard,
go
okay? Not that copycat down in Houston. But he comes in, slings the ball all over the field, drives them down. They score a touchdown. The Raiders come down, score. They went back and forth, and then with 19 seconds left and no timeouts, Fitzpatrick gets the ball, slings it down the field, hits a guy who somehow was wide open on the sidelines. As he gets his face mask grabbed and yanked down by the face mask, completed pass, guy goes out of bounds, 15 yards added on to the end of the play. Field goal is kicked. Dolphins win. It was amazing. Now, I don't know if you heard this part of it or not. They asked Ryan Fitzpatrick after the game and said, when did you find out? He said, well, for the first time in my 15 or 16-year career, I had to pee during a game. He said, so I ran into the tunnel. I peed. I came back out. Coach Flores came over and said, you're going in. So I took my 7 obligatory warm-up throws and went in the game. Everything about this guy makes me like him more. Every time I hear a story about him, I like him more.
Yeah, he's great. Great story. Like I said, I do give the coach credit for just, providing the spark. I mean, you were going to go down in flames if not so. And quarterback controversy there, or is this right back to the plan, and we run it up with Tua, and Fitzmagic comes in when you need a passing attack?
That's it. I think Brian Flores already said, no, Tua's the guy. He's still going to play. He's still going to start. But I do think if you're Tua, you have to learn the lesson of like, hey, you gotta score. You can't just play mistake free. You've got to actually do some good. It's not enough to be Trent Edwards. You got to be, for all my Bills fans out there, you get that reference. The stats are less important than you've got to get the team down the field in a position to win the game.
I mean, there's probably not a better backup quarterback to have in the league. I mean, he'd probably start for half the teams legitimately, and he's great. I mean, it's fun to watch. Like I said, the Dolphins are interesting. So I can't imagine the Dolphins fans thought that they were doing anything this year, and here they are. So
no, for sure. And now we can jump into the bottom 5. I'm going to keep the Jets as the worst team in the NFL. I am.
No respect.
None. Listen, again, you beat a team with no starting wide receivers. I'm not impressed. I'm sorry. The Jaguars did not look good, and the Bears aren't good, but they do have a winning record, and you did get the crap kicked out of you by that team. But I am thrilled that the Jaguars are going to get the first pick and the Jets are not. As a Bills fan, I was 100% shooting for the Jets this weekend. So the Jaguars are number 2. I have bumped the Falcons up to number 3 because this is just incredible to watch them implode.
They should get bonus points for the talent level that they have.
I know.
And still lose.
I have no explanation for how they're this bad.
They should be in the NFC East.
They'd probably come in second place.
The Cowboys should switch spots.
Yeah, that would not be a bad idea, but they are atrocious. I have the Texans now in as the next worst team in football. It's not getting better. Same thing. Plenty of talent. There's no reason for them to be this bad, but they are.
Yeah, they're missing their top 3 receivers from the beginning of the year too, for all different reasons. But yeah, they're not good.
No,
and they're great to play fantasy players against too. Their defense is terrible,
awful.
Like the Vikings. Yeah,
right. So, and then to top this off, and we're making show history today. This will be the first bottom 5 that does not contain a member of the NFC East. The last team is the Cincinnati Bengals. No disrespect to your Steelers, but again, they're just not good. They got a fluke win against when Joe Burrow comes back, it'll correct all the ills. The reason that there's no NFC East teams more than anything else is not because I actually think that none of them belong. It's because I don't know which one does. I can't make an argument to put the Cowboys in over the Eagles or the Giants over the Washington football team. I got nothing. I don't know who to put in there, and I can't give all 4 because they don't all 4 belong in there.
Yeah, to me it's the Eagles, but that's just because they tied the Bengals, right? And they tied the Bengals. They should just tie.
They did. It probably should be.
They should be just tied at 5.
So we'll give them a tie. The Eagles and the Bengals will be number 5.
Excellent. Congratulations, Eagles.
Yeah, God love them. They're just not good either.
So we got a Week 17 coming up. I expect there to be some moving and shaking in the playoff standings, but it's at least sorted itself mostly out now, and we just have a few games. Basically, the NFC East and the that last spot in the AFC there. So.
The Bills are going to play the Dolphins next week, and then there's a pretty good chance they're going to play the Dolphins in the playoffs the week after.
Practice.
It'll be a fun game to watch next Sunday because neither team will want to reveal anything that they're going to do. It'll be the first time Devin Singletary carries the ball 25 times in a game all season.
You may have missed it over the holiday weekend, but Bitcoin hit 28,300.
Oh, I didn't miss it. It's insanity.
I made sure you didn't miss it.
I know. I keep getting those texts all the time.
So new all-time highs. It basically made all-time highs something like 4 or 5 straight days. And I don't know. I don't even know what to say anymore. Obviously, we're in uncharted waters, price discovery, whatever you want to call it. It is just moving and shaking. You guys may have noticed I added a little widget, if you will, little window for the Bitcoin price will kind of stay in our floating above my head. Excuse me. For the main screen here, you'll be able to see Bitcoin's moving price. So right now it's still floating around 27,000.
What does it mean?
What?
What does the 28,000
That's what
Bitcoin mean? No. I get like the definition.
That's how much it would transfer into fiat.
Correct. But what does it mean bigger picture conceptually for Bitcoin? Why do you
Well,
think
I think the biggest thing that has happened that is different than all the other Bitcoin run-ups is the amount of institutional money that's coming into this thing. And it's not going anywhere. It's not going into Ethereum, really. It's not going into any of these other alts. Like, it is going all into Bitcoin, all of it, all of the money. I mean, the percentage of market cap, I think Bitcoin, they have it broken down by Bitcoin and all the other alts.
Sure.
And it's like 70% of the total market cap. In 2018, it was like 40%. So, I mean, it's just not the same anymore. Mm-hmm. It's at all-time highs. Nothing else is at all-time highs.
Right.
Ethereum is far from all-time highs. Litecoin is far from all-time highs. Bitcoin is blasting through all-time highs. So
there's some institutional money coming in.
Massive
do you
amounts.
think that is a supply and demand, or do you think it's a fear about currency that's driving the institutional money?
There's always going to, I mean, listen, the purists like me who got into it because they think the dollar's just trash are not the majority of the people anymore. I mean, the early majority are, but the people who are coming into the market now are not those people. The people who are coming into the market now are using it as a form of value. It's an asset. They're buying it in billions of dollars. It's not, and like I said, the access to it now. We didn't really talk about this, but PayPal added it, so like now you can get it through PayPal and some other alts there you can get through PayPal. So the ease of access to it is just not the same as it was even, again, 2 years ago, but especially in its infancy. So the people who had it originally were buying it, or not even buying it, they were getting it through
writing code.
Sure. I mean, they were either mining it, or they had a wallet, or they were being able to transfer it, or having it on their computer. But the invention of, or the introduction of Coinbase, and now PayPal's introduction, the Cash App, and there's a bunch of others who now have access to Bitcoin, has allowed it to have this retail market that has kind of flourished, but it's the institutional money that's separated from all these other altcoins, and that it's tens of billions of dollars that's being invested in this. It actually is higher market cap now than Visa. So,
wow.
I know there's still haters out there who think it's worthless and it's going to go to zero. I just can't imagine that being the case anymore.
I don't either. I do think institutional-wise, it's probably just a play by these bigger companies to make some money because it's a supply and demand more than anything else. Because I think ultimately
But if they're getting in at like 25,000,
right?
Like they got to think it's going up, right?
Well, they also are going to sell it. They're buying it, so other people can invest it.
They're not going to sell it at 28,000.
What they're going to do is they'll pump it up. And listen, I'm a believer. I think it's a good thing. I think institutional investors always make me a little nervous, because I think institutionally we tend to give these people entirely too much credit for their ability to foresee the future or develop trends or anything else. And I think in the reality is many of these places, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, whomever else you want to talk about, they're in it to make money. So if they see an opportunity where they know people are starting to garner more interest in Bitcoin, their mindset is less, hey, what can we do with this? And is this a good idea? And hey, how can we sell this to them and make money? So that we pass the risk along, we charge fees, we collect fees, we make more money giving the people what they want.
Yeah, well, I'm sure there was a demand for it from their clients.
Correct.
So they provided them the product, sure.
I just have no faith in banks.
And they were losing, really billions of dollars by not offering it, because other people it was just lost revenue. Like, they were not tapping into a clearly growing market.
Right.
And there's still not even the close to the amount of like online buzz. And if you look at Google Trends and stuff, like the 2017, 2018 was far higher than this. Like, there's not really the buzz out there that there was 2 years ago. And again, there is some of this retail people buying it, but it is the institutional money that's come in and driving the price up at this point. And like I said, there's if you're looking at like technical analysis, if people are looking at charts, like there's nothing to look at. It's above its all-time. It's again hitting all-time highs basically on a daily basis. So there's nothing to really compare it to and try to trade off of. So, 28,000 is kind of crazy. Like you said, I think we were talking on the show when it hit 15,000. I remember doing something. I think I'm going to hit 10,000. We were like, 10,000, whatever. So, here we are in a matter of a few weeks. Anybody who got in at that point has done pretty good. So
absolutely.
Hopefully,
keep your eye on it,
keep it going. And I don't know. Maybe it's a bigger stimulus package than the one we got coming out of our federal government. Is my Bitcoin?
What a laughable excuse. Yeah. Hey, sorry about killing your business and everything else, and your unemployment's going to run out here. Here's $600.
So we got people like AOC who basically trash the bill, basically say it's a bunch of hot garbage, and then she signs for it, and then signs the bill, and then you got the president himself calling it a disgrace, asking for modifications. I'm going to sign it anyway. So grandstanding by these politicians. I don't know.
I'm sure they really believe it. It's hot garbage. But
yeah, I think their opinions were right the first time. Their actions don't seem to. Don't seem to back up their words.
Their words, yes. I think that this is one of listen, I'm so happy people are starting to pay attention because this is how things have been done forever. This is how our government, and I'm going to put this in air quotes, functions, end of air quote. They do this stuff all the time by scaring the population into thinking, and this is why, right on key over the weekend, if you saw it, Donald Trump came out and said, this is a joke, laid out some of the things that were in there that were just, they had no business. And please don't, I get it. They attached it to an omnibus spending bill that was going to fund a bunch of other stuff. But let's go practicality now.
That's still the point, right?
You couldn't pass the COVID bill without all the extra stuff. So forgive me if I'm going to lump it all together since that's what these idiots did. Fact check nothing. So they do this. And then what it is every lobbyist, every special interest throws things in there repeatedly to say, hey, add this on, and here's the donation for you, Mr. Senator, Madam Congresswoman, whomever. Here, take this and take this. So now the problem is, all right, so Donald Trump comes out and says, this is a joke, line by line, do better, get more money, whatever else. Then over the next couple of days, I don't know if anybody else saw it, all the news headlines come out. Unemployment's going to end on Monday, and people are going to be destitute. And what does this mean for small businesses without this bill coming through and this, that, the government could shut down? And so now the media spin machine comes in and scares people. So now you as the voter go back to your congressperson or your senator and say, look, we need something. I know it's not perfect, but don't just do nothing. We got to have it. So then they all get pressured into signing this piece of garbage of a bill that sends money all over the planet, all over the country to all these unrelated entities. But the lobbyists did their job. The senators and Congress people all made their money. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is your United States government in action.
It's terrible.
It's a joke. Listen, it's an absolute joke. It's a parody of how the government should run, but it's 100% how it happens. And spare me the claims about how it's all Mitch McConnell's fault or it's all Chuck Schumer's fault. It's all of their faults. Yeah. Every one of them does this, with rare exceptions. I'll give the libertarians a small pass on this because, for the most part, that's why they ran, is to say this is a joke. And I love Rand Paul's Festivus airing of grievances every year where he just lays out the stupidity of what we are doing. But for years, nobody knew this. Nobody paid attention enough to care. Now it's starting to get identified of wait, what do you mean our COVID relief bill, a part of this is in the omnibus bill is to send money to Pakistan to study gender studies? What? How is that related to COVID? And those of us who've been watching politics for the last 20 years go, it just gets worse from here. Welcome to the club. Now you're going to hate it too.
This is right. That's how libertarians are born. They come to a realization that the government is a complete sham, or the government screws them over at some point, and they realize the government is
a complete sham.
Yeah, right. So, right. Again, we joke in libertarian worlds that everybody's libertarian. They just don't know it. I do think most people are willing to live their lives without government edict, right? And they can. So that's really what it's kind of born out of, is they don't need the helping hand, the fatherly advice of government or the nurturing of government. They don't need parents out of their government. They just need somebody who's going to monitor a playing field to make sure that there is no harm done. And we're just so far from that it's, beyond recognition.
Yeah, people have been so conditioned to think that the government is this benevolent force for good. In reality, it's the exact opposite. Now, listen, they might have the well-intentioned principles, but the road to hell. This is insanity. Think about anything the government tries to fight. It ends up every single time in more. We started the war on drugs. How'd that go?
Drugs won.
We started the war on poverty. How'd that go?
Poverty's going pretty good.
Yeah. We started to say, well, we're going to fight we're going to do stuff to protect workers. So we're going to fight to protect more employees. What do we get less of? Employees. All of these things the government gets involved in, they make worse. And it's not because of any reason. I don't think they're actually evil. I think they genuinely think this will work. They just don't understand how markets work or how a basic economy functions. If you didn't have the government to mandate that somebody doesn't pay you minimum wage, what do you think would happen? That every employer is going to barge together and band together and just say, well, no, now we're going to pay everybody $1 an hour. Okay, well, I think that I'm not going to go work for you then. Oh, well, yeah. What if you do it? Everybody does. I don't know, maybe start my own business and pay somebody $4 an hour because now I have a competitive advantage. And I could still make money on it. But we don't think that way anymore. We think in terms of, well, if the government doesn't mandate it, then these evil corporations will just do whatever they want. Okay.
Yeah, they've I would say the government has purposely generated a importance of itself to require dependence by its people. And we see it more than ever today. We've said this a couple times, there's zero chance you could have painted this picture to me a year ago and I'd have been like, you're in a different country. But here we are. Yeah. And the people are completely reliant on the government for all of their information, all of their decision making. It's scary a little bit. But here we are. And at least we got some relief coming from the government to help us all.
Yeah, thank God. That won't have any negative consequences. Don't worry. The national debt can hit $50 trillion and it'll all be fine. We're only at 30 right now. It'll be okay. Don't worry about a thing.
Just a rounding error.
But either way, look, everybody has this preconceived notions of corporations as these greedy, evil things. And listen, some of them are. No question. Some of these people at the heads of corporations are awful human beings.
And I wouldn't even try to cut you short. I mean, greed is not necessarily something I would think of as a negative light. It's their greed is coupled with the access to the government.
Right. If you had a greedy CEO that didn't have any government contracts or anything else and just had somebody pointing out how awful of a human being he was, number one, people wouldn't work there. Number two, they would have a competitor come in and say, look, I'm going to take this guy out because of this. So let me just go down this pathway of, look, some CEOs are awful people. Looking at you, pharmaceutical industries, looking at you, banks. But either way, it's not even that they're awful. They're indifferent to human suffering. They are indifferent to the idea of, at least on some level. I'll give it to you. Do you think politicians are not? Because keep in mind, what occupies our government is politicians. They're what run it. And I don't care if it's politicians from the elected officials to the bureaucrats that have to play this game to get their promotions and see their self-interest and make sure that they continue to advance in their career, not by merit, but by politics. Looking at you, Dr. Fauci. So, looking at all of these things, what do you think is more common? That the politicians and bureaucrats are corrupt and indifferent to you personally and more concerned about their own well-being, or the people that run and open businesses and employ people? Which do you think is more common? Or do you think it's a tie? Either way, you're picking one of these two things. So you want the government to protect you from the companies. All right, I mean, that's kind of like having the coyote come to protect you from the rooster. They're both could cause harm, but one of them's way more dangerous, and this is what we do.
Right, and as I said, I'd like to just, disconnect that trough from the corporations and let them survive on their own without these, government regulations that insulate them from competition. Like I said, it's not the corporations themselves; it's the corporations that have the access to the government. and politicians.
Exactly correct. And what they've done with banks, with financial institutions, and even with pharmaceutical companies to a lesser extent is you've privatized profits and socialized losses. So the banks are too big to fail. The insurance companies are too big to fail. All this stuff is. So they're encouraged and they're incentivized to take bigger risks because if they make more money, they get to keep it. If they lose money, the government, you, me, him, every taxpayer, goes and bails them out.
CAIG.
This is insanity of what do you think this incentivizes people to do? Like, if you want to make sure that people are incentivized to do the right thing, stop doing this. Because now they know full well we've established this precedent. If you fail, don't worry. Government's going to step right in and take this guy's tax dollars and your tax dollars and my tax dollars and bail you out. And then in the absolute worst of insults in 2009 when they did this, all these executives at the bank turned around and gave themselves a bonus for the handling of this situation.
They did such a good job.
This is comical once you start looking into all this but it's the fact that the government is so involved and they are so regulated that prohibits any new competition from coming in. If you think I'm wrong, try to open a business, particularly one in financial services. Go try to open up your own bank. See what's involved. Try to open a restaurant and see how many hoops you have to jump through just to get something open because you want to sell food, especially in this state. Go try. I promise you, what you'll realize is regulation helps big businesses. What we have right now is not free market capitalism. We have a Frankenstein's monster of crony capitalism where all of these people in the upper echelon give each other donations and back scratches to pass new rules and restrictions to say, okay.
And then get hired in the administrations of the next.
Correct.
Yeah, so they get
and
to
this
massage
is it's hysterical to watch. Like, I love when
It's
the
an oligarchy,
socialists
yeah.
tell me, like, yeah, it's because real socialism's never been tried. First off, please shut up. But if you're going to make that argument, okay, then let me make the counter argument. We don't have real free market capitalism
Not even
either.
close.
Like, it's not close to it of whatever ridiculous system we have at this point. It's a joke. And it's the saddest joke imaginable to watch. The spending bill is a great example of it. Why did these things get funded in here? Well, they know they needed to get it in, and they wanted to get it in on a time when it would not get overly scrutinized. So they put it in now. That's all. Because everybody's so focused on the COVID that we're going to forget about this, and the next one's going to come up, and nobody's going to dive through these 5,000-page spending bills. But just think about this. It's your money going to all these other countries and going to all of these other purposes. I'm not even saying they're all bad things. Science does require grant money, and federal grants are terrific. Fine. But aren't you a little curious about the fact that, hey, if my money's going to this, maybe I don't want my tax dollars to go study gender studies in Pakistan or to go study and count fish in the Gulf of Mexico.
Or, try to make that sell at a different time of history as opposed to being where you've just destroyed the country and now you're like, we're going to fund some other countries.
Right.
So, yeah, the disconnect is...
Study gender studies in America, for God's sakes. Let's go.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, all in agreement there. So
USA. US. No,
not that I was shocked when it was signed, but
I told my wife on Thursday that thing was getting signed.
yeah. So I mean,
like,
we're
let it go
long
off.
from
He's signing
the
it.
one page. Hey, give $2,000 to everybody bill, or let's just put a clean bill to unemployment. Like, nope, they got to tie it all to everything. So
Not only that, here's this crazy notion of it's pretty well established that the lockdowns have had no effect on the spread of COVID-19 whatsoever. We have 10 months of data, 9 months of data from all over the world showing that it didn't work. So I know this is going to sound nuts. Maybe just lift the restrictions and then we don't need to keep arguing over whether people should get $600 or $2,000 from the government that, by the way, doesn't have any money. Let's not pretend like they do. Because I promise you, if you said I got $1,000 in the bank and $50,000 of debt, you have a net worth of below zero. And our government brings in $3 trillion a year in tax revenue, has $29 trillion of national debt, and spends $4 trillion a year. But don't worry. They're just going to print more money. It'll all be fine because there's no reason for that. Why do we even pay taxes? We should just print more money.
yeah, that's what kind of Rand Paul's like. Why are we just stopping here? Like, just give everybody the money.
Right. And so you sit back and
but
watch
they
it
know
laugh.
that it doesn't work that way. They just,
Nobody is incentivized to stop. Nobody.
That's crazy.
And listen, for the first time, I went to Buffalo for Christmas. I went and saw my in-laws. I don't care if you are judging me for traveling on Christmas. Honestly, just spare me. I don't
Heathen.
care. I know. But we went there. We visited with them. We had a great time. but they watch like local news a lot in the background. I don't watch much local or national news. And it was this eye-opening experience to finally understand why people are jumping down my throat every time I say something that, like, hey, guys, what we're doing is nuts, and COVID does not justify this. I don't watch it. Oh, my God. It is fear-mongering to the nth degree. I knew that, but to actually watch it was, oh, God, no wonder people are so afraid. This is just...
Yeah, once you know it, and then you go back and look at it, like, you can't unsee it. Like, it's all you see.
No, it's awful. And it's not like they're saying anything outright false.
Right, no.
It's just everything is without context and is implying things in the opposite direction. Like, oh, this many people died. And you're like, yeah, but like 8,000 people die every day in America. Like, this is... I'm sorry that it happens, but in context... You're acting as if this is some insane number that we've never seen before, but it's not that, especially when you look into the context of this, well, these tests are the best thing ever, and they get all these doctors out there to, like, we've been preaching from the mountaintops to follow the protocols. Like, we've been following the protocols, and they don't work. I don't know what you want me to tell you. Like, how long do we keep trying the same thing without you guys having to adjust any of your recommendations?
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. Like, they're just sticking with the plan. They need a new plan, and I just don't see that happening. So
I'm begging everybody out there, shut off the local news because it is just misinformation. It is just meant to scare you. Like, it was so
watch the weather.
It was so eye-opening to look at this and go, oh, this is why people are freaking out, because I'm listening to what they're saying and going, I mean, that's technically not false, but that's the complete wrong conclusion to draw from it. Or, yeah, like, this is reporting, like, 500 people died in America today. Like, no, like 8,000 people died in America today. Like, this is how many die every day. And like, well, if we would just stop traveling and stop doing all this, of like, here's a crazy idea. Why don't you talk about the PCR tests and how they're generating false positives? Why is that getting no coverage whatsoever? Why are we still not asking for parsed out numbers of deaths between age groups, stressing the idea of the older you are, the more dangerous this is? If you are over 75, this is a very different illness than if you are under 75. I know I'm being oversimple. Just give me a little bit of a wiggle room on that. But the problem is we're so committed to the falsity that now we have a terrible plan for the vaccination. Now, you and I have talked about this. I won't take the vaccine. I don't think there's any reason for me to take the vaccine whatsoever, especially since they don't even know if it prevents you from spreading. There's no upside for me to take this vaccine whatsoever. But let's say I think it works. I think that if I was 75, I would take it. I think then it would be worth the risk to take the vaccine. Instead of being the most common sense idea for reopening is we have a virus that is exponentially more fatal to anybody over the age of 75 and is exponentially less dangerous. If you are, all right, let's go 50 to 75, you're sort of in the gray area, and I'm being very generous with that age. Anybody under 50, even accounting for comorbids, it's not a very deadly virus. Okay, I get there's long haul symptoms, fine. Again, very rare. But if you watch the news, you'd think it was everybody that happened, this is coming, but it's not. It's exceedingly rare. So I got a vaccine that I don't know if it stops you from transmitting, but it'll stop you from getting really sick. So what would you do? Because our plan was, let's go to all the frontline workers that are 30 and give them the vaccine first. Well, okay, if that stopped them from spreading, I would get it. Or if it was a really high risk for them to be ill or get sick or die, I would get it, but it's not. Like, you've seen the numbers on the spread from hospitals, and the numbers still bear out. If you're younger, you're not symptomatic, you're not dying, even with all the exposures that you have. So wouldn't it make more sense? And it's not like the vaccine stops you from spreading. We don't know that. They've already said we have no idea if this will stop you from spreading. Cool. Why would you not start with the people that are most at risk of having negative effects? So why wouldn't you go to every nursing home, to every single hospital, to every senior living center, to everywhere out and say, listen, if you are over the age of 65, come get your vaccine right now. Frontline workers, we will get to you next. Now, if you're a frontline worker over the age of 50, you go to the front of the line. Come on in if you want it. Take it. We're ready to roll. Everything else is let's protect the most vulnerable first. And I'm not like dismissing the fears of the frontline workers. I'm looking at the data and saying they're not at any greater risk of dying than somebody in the general public from this virus.
Yeah, we haven't seen any data that says that.
None whatsoever. And, what if they spread it because they're exposed? Again, we don't even know if the vaccine stops you from spreading it. It just means that you're not going to get sick. That's the benefit. That's what the 95% effective rate is. So you don't know if it's going to stop from spreading. Why wouldn't you focus on what it actually does, which is stops you from dying? So let's go to the people that are dying, because we only have so much of the vaccine right now, and go give it to them.
Yeah. Oh, I said I offered my solution. I said, let's start with 90-year-olds, start with them at the front of the line, then go to 80, and then go to 70, and then get everybody else.
Right. Listen, if you're a healthcare worker and you're older, you get to move up.
Sure.
Everybody else is by age, period. The older you are, and if you want it, I'm not forcing anybody to get it. If you don't want it, don't take it. But let's make it available there and work our way down. I guarantee you, based on all of the available data, all of the available evidence, and all of the available trends that we're seeing from all over the world, that would result in fewer people getting sick and fewer people dying than what we are currently doing. Because what we are currently doing is based on fear and hype instead of on the actual data that says the older people are by far the most dangerous. Long-haul COVID is exceedingly rare and could be caused by other things than just COVID. And all these other serious, I'm not telling you it's a pleasant experience. I know people that had COVID. They said it was the worst flu they ever had. It was 2 weeks long of pure hell. And they're thankful they didn't have a gun nearby. Like, that's how bad this is if you get it. And I am not dismissing that. I'm not discounting it. I'm asking for a common sense approach to how we fight it. And the common sense approach is you triage the same way the medical community does every other time. 50 people come into the ER at once. You don't take the guy with the broken finger first, no matter how much pain he's in, because he's not going to die. You go take the woman whose leg is about to fall off or who has a hole in her chest. You start there, and then you work your way down to the guy whose leg is faced the wrong direction. I'm sorry you're in pain, but it ain't getting any better and it ain't getting any worse. We got to focus on the lives we can save first. You're going to have to hang out.
Yeah, I didn't even think it was really all that controversial, and apparently it is. So
how is it controversial? This is just like, the problem is, though, that as I say this, I know people are going to hear it and be like, well, that's because you don't understand this, that, and other. Like, no, I do. I've read the studies. I've read the data. I've looked at this stuff. If all you've done is watch the news, you think that what you're saying makes sense. I'm telling you, based on the data, it doesn't. Yeah. Because if you're watching the news, I promise you, you're getting about 10% of the overall information that's actually available. 10%, and I'm being generous. And it's all skewed in the same direction. So now it's created this echo chamber where once you told people, like, well, this is a risk for everybody, and some of us were going, well, no, it's really just a risk for the really older people. That's the largest risk by far. Like, if you could protect them, the mortality rate on this virus would drop to 0.00004. Like, I'm not saying nobody would die, but it's exponentially lower. Instead, you've committed now to people of being afraid and wearing your mask and staying away, and it could be you, and you don't know. And so now you can't go back on that and say, well, let's just focus on the old people now, because now you got everybody afraid, like, wait, I could be at risk too. Well, yeah, but it's really, really small. You can't say it. You are now so far committed to this delusion that you can't back out. So now we've got kids going and missing school and partial closures, and you're like, none of this makes sense. Like, the kids aren't spreading it. The kids aren't getting sick. The kids aren't dying. Well, teachers, the teachers, right, except they have the same exact infection rate whether kids are in school or they're fully remote.
Yeah, if you're an older teacher, get in line.
Right. You get to go to the front of the line, too. Congratulations. Go get the vaccine, or if you don't want it, good for you. Take the risk, because the odds are if you've spent 30-plus years working with young children, your immune system is amazing. We've been exposed to every coronavirus ever.
Yeah, we did get some news, a couple things out of the World Health Organization since the last show.
It's like you're just trying to piss me off today.
Well, I don't know if one's good, one's bad, one's both bad. I don't know how to play this, but so the World Health Organization provided some guidance after what they said many scientists were basically asking for this, alerting them to the idea that there was a high risk of a false positive. So they offered some advice to institutions who are using this test. Two of them, I'm just going to read here, are basically exactly what we've been saying for months here. Provide the cycle threshold values. Shocker.
Weird.
What?
We've only been saying that since October. It's cool. We're not scientists, so we'll shut up. Don't worry about listening to us.
And which I thought was maybe even, I mean, that's one obviously we've been beaten over the head with, but like, so consider any positive result or negative result in combination with a specimen type. So basically they want you to not classify a case unless there's actually a positive test and symptoms.
And the symptoms matter more than a positive or negative test to them.
So I don't know. I mean, I don't know what to say anymore about the PCR test because we've been talking about it forever.
Here's what we got to say about the PCR test. And I'm going to go back on this. If you're watching local news, if you're watching national news, this is what you're not hearing about. This guidance was dated December 7th. It's currently December 28th. 3 weeks this guidance has been out there. How many local news stations have covered it?
None that I know of.
How many national news stations have gone over? I don't care if it's Fox News, OAN, CNN, MSNBC. I haven't seen anybody talk about this. I sent this to a friend of mine, and he wrote back, and he's sort of on the other side of it of like, hey, no, this is the scientists know what they're doing. And I'm like, look, the PCR tests are they're bad. This is a bad idea. So I sent him that, and he's like, I can't. He wrote fake news or something as a joke. So I sent him the actual World Health Organization website link. It's right there. And he wrote back, I can't find this on any national news network whatsoever, not even on a website. And I wrote back, welcome to my confusion and frustration over the past 9 months. This is not a controversial statement. The PCR tests absolutely generate false positive. The WHO came out and said, if you are not disclosing cycle thresholds, then you're doing an injustice because we know that these are going to generate a lot of false positives and it's going to lead to bad things. The WHO is basically covering its own ass right now. That's all they're doing. We've known this for months. And so they came out and said, do it. Not one news channel covered it. Not one policy. Andrew Cuomo covered this in any of the press conferences
I
he's
missed
done.
his 11:30 case today, so unless he covered it today.
Anybody bring it up to him? Any reporter ask the question?
I have emailed it on to our local officials, if that matters to anybody.
It helps. And listen, everybody, and I understand our local officials are kind of stuck because King Cuomo, listen, if you think you stand up to Andrew Cuomo and there's not ramifications next year, you're wrong. I still want somebody to do it. Don't get me wrong, not excusing it.
Well, so how is this even really standing up to Cuomo, right? Like, you just reporting the data. Like, if our county wanted to say, hey, we're going to start reporting cycle thresholds with our case, or even better yet, just retest these positives with an antigen test or another PCR test or an antibody test, all one of those three would give you some variation of where this person is within the virus or whether or not they should be treated as a case or not. We don't do any of it. We just get one report, we get one test, we get one number. It's not even a number. It's a black or white, positive or negative. It's just a yes or no. It's misleading, and it is driving the fear.
Oh, yeah.
In large part, I guess, in addition to, it is driving all the restrictions because we're using positivity rate as the measure by which we are locking down. So if these positivity rates are distortedly high, then we probably shouldn't be locking down. And that's kind of what I was hoping that we can get any local official. I don't care what county it is, what city it is, anywhere. Just start asking for these numbers and then just start putting these numbers with the positive test. We could probably thin the herd, allowing additional resources to be better utilized to the people that actually need them, as opposed to, and a bigger picture, reopen the world. So, like, this is not a New York thing. This is not a U.S. thing. This is a global thing. There are lawsuits. There's class action lawsuits in multiple countries. This is a bigger thing than just sports, clicks, and politics and me and Ben. We just happen to be aware that it's going on, and nobody else seems to realize it.
Nobody seems to care is my bigger issue with it. I've talked about
it's hard to explain, though. So sometimes when they say they don't care, sometimes I feel like I'm just talking to a glazed over face, right? So, like, and I've been there because I don't know what the hell I was talking about early on. Again, allowing our access to Mr. McKernan was great because we get to ask him questions, like really, dumb guy questions. I got the same thing within a family member. I can ask really dumb questions and get really detailed answers and not feel stupid. So I hope that the message gets to some of these local officials at some point, and that is a way out of this. I mean, if you can, even if one county or one region started grouping cycle thresholds and reporting them, they would immediately see if there was a problem. If all of their antigen tests are showing up no positives or 0.5 positivity rate, and that's the positivity rate, but all of your high positivity rates are coming from the PCR test, then that should send a red flag being like, hey, well, maybe this one test is actually not giving us the accurate. I mean, we celebrate when we get no antigen positives, but we could be doing better if we're just reporting the accurate positivities on these PCR tests, and we're just not doing it at all.
Right. And it doesn't make sense what we're doing, because I know the counter argument already is, well, we'd better test. It's better to have too many false positives than false negatives, and especially if people don't have symptoms and they could still spread it. All right, let's talk about actual data and actual science now. There is not one conclusively proven case of asymptomatic spread in the entire world. Not one. Hasn't happened that we know of. Now, am I telling you it couldn't happen, that we couldn't see a change in the data? No, of course we could. Absolutely, it could happen, but we don't have it yet. We do have some pre-symptomatic spread, which means, okay, you don't have symptoms yet, but you developed them within 24 hours after seeing somebody and you gave it to them. Okay, yes, and see, that's the same thing. How can we tell the difference? I get it. Except pre-symptomatic spread is so exceedingly rare that to plan for that and prepare for that makes no sense whatsoever from a planning standpoint. It is a infinitesimally small number of the cases that get spread is from pre-symptomatic spread. For the most part, it is when you have it, when you have symptoms, you are now sick. And now this is another thing where the PCR test actually could help. Like if you get a positive PCR test, you should go back 2 days later and take another one. And then you should go back 2 days later and take another one, because you're going to want to see if you're getting more, if the viral load's getting higher, or if the viral load is on its way down. That's what we should be using the PCR test for, because that would tell us accurately when we should be quarantining and for how long, or if we need to at all. Listen, this isn't new information. If you read any of these studies that have been testing treatments, vaccines, or anything else on how they qualify who has COVID-19, not one of them just uses a PCR test. Every single test breaks out PCR plus symptoms. There's a reason for this. It's because the people that are actually studying this and know this, they know that a PCR test in and of itself, run to 40 cycles, is not indicative of whether or not you actually have COVID-19.
Yeah, literally running to any cycle, it's not going to tell you whether or not you're actually infectious or not. It's
right.
It's just a measure of amplification, and it doesn't tell you whether or not you're actually sick.
Right.
I don't know. It's been a problem for a long time. You know, maybe in the background, people are aware of it and they're switching to more antigen tests as opposed to PCR tests. I hope that's happening, because any way that we can get this positivity rate down, the better. And like I said, I think these PCR tests are distortingly high. And like I said, we could back it up multiple ways. As you pointed out, get another PCR test, or get the antigen test, or get an antibody test. All three of those would give you additional information that you could use to better identify whether or not you were a case or not. And we don't do any of it.
Right. So, and then this is where I mean about misleading. Like, if you want to start really breaking down data, it's very interesting. And I encourage everybody to go read more of this, because the PCR tests, we've known this forever, that they're wrong. Like, we have no idea how many people actually have COVID-19. We really don't know, because we're using these tests that are designed. Look, anything above 35 cycles, we're not talking about a small number of false positives. So you're talking about if you test positive at 36 cycles or above, 97 times out of 100, that's a false positive. If the test did not pick it up anywhere between cycle 20 and cycle 35, but it picks it up at 36, 9 out of 10, let's round down, 9 out of 10 of those are false positives. So this is the importance of needing the cycle threshold. I want to know if my PCR test came back positive at 21 cycles or at 40. Because at 40, I'm not even thinking about this anymore. It's not even on my mind. At 21, even if I don't have symptoms, I'm going to isolate and quarantine. Because I'm anticipating I'm going to develop symptoms at that point, and I want to know when. But we talk about measuring viral load. We don't know for sure that viral load has any relationship with transmissibility of the virus, because there were some studies that came out. University of Chicago did one and said kids actually have a very high viral load, which is accurate. They do, and they said basically it assumed that since other viruses spread this way, high viral load means you're more likely to transmit. Except that we know children don't transmit the virus now. So it's not, we assume that just because you have a high viral load, you're more contagious, but that is not as simple as that. There's more factors at play, and we know that for sure. Otherwise, children would absolutely be spreading this virus with much greater efficiency than they do. Number two that people don't know about that they should know about is pre-existing immunity. A large portion of people have pre-existing immunity to COVID-19, to SARS-CoV-2. It's not everybody. based on the study you want to look at, it's somewhere between 20 and 60% of the population has pre-existing T-cell immunity, which is better than antibodies. It's better than getting it and getting over it. And then antibodies eventually turn into T-cell immunity. And you've got this because coronaviruses have been around for a very long time. And yes, this is a novel virus. However, it's very similar to, and it shares qualities with some of the pre-existing coronaviruses back in 2008, 2010, 2011, when they had these COVID or these coronaviruses. So your body, in its immaculate wisdom and capacity, has developed some existing immunity to these coronaviruses, and where it recognizes, okay, this is apart from the 2008, 2011, 2013, our body knows what to do, and it's going to go fight it. That's amazing. Like, our body's immune systems are absolutely incredible that when you think about it. But honestly, ask people if they know this when you're walking around. Hey, did you know that somewhere between 20 and 60% of the people actually already have full immunity to COVID? Nobody knows that. Why are we not studying to figure out the exact number? Why have we not done any more studies to figure out exactly how many people have pre-existing immunity, or at least get a closer estimate than 20 to 60%? That is something we should all want the answer to. All right, it doesn't all have to be doom and gloom to make it that you're responsible. Again, every percentage increase in unemployment in the United States of America is 37,000 deaths, okay? These consequences of these actions are not zero. Everything that we're doing has an impact on some other aspect of our life, and it's all negative. So we're so busy fighting this 1% exception to the rule instead of fighting the 99%. Because we should all be aware that many people have pre-existing immunity. We should all be aware that the PCR tests generate false positives. We should all be aware that this virus, the mortality rate is infinitely higher for anybody over the age of 75 than for anybody under the age of 70. And we should all know that the younger that you are, this virus is absolutely, unquestionably, unarguably less dangerous than the flu if you are under the age of 50 years old. Now, I'm not saying it's still no risk, because please keep in mind, the flu kills people every single year.
Except 2020.
Except, I mean, actually, that's really true.
I'm sorry.
It's true, though. Like 2020, there is no flu. And listen, it might be a conspiracy and we're just not testing for it, which we're not. Try to get a flu test. Let me know how it goes, because you're not going to get one. But the other part of it is you're seeing this worldwide, which would lend some credence to the idea that when you have two respiratory viruses, one wins. They fight each other, and COVID is a stronger one than the flu as far as infectability, so it actually beats out the seasonal flu, and that's what people are getting. Or it could be that we're not testing, or, this is going to sound crazy, maybe it's a combination of more than just one factor. Maybe there's multiple things that play into all of these numbers. Like, hey, you want to know why the mortality rate was so high in New York City early on? Because a lot of places were putting people on ventilators on day 3 to day 5. We now know that that's a bad idea and is going to result in people dying that would not otherwise have died. Now, please don't jump down my throat. I'm aware not every hospital did that. Not every doctor did that. Not every patient was immediately put on a ventilator. I know. It was still far more common than it is now. This isn't an arguable point. This isn't something that's a gray area. We now know putting somebody on a ventilator and jacking the ventilator all the way up to 100% or 90%, whatever the max setting is going to result in people dying that otherwise would not have died. Our treatments have gotten a lot better. The reality is we made terrible mistakes early on. Terrible. We didn't know. Some of it we should have known it was just a bad mistake, but the numbers don't lie. It got into the nursing homes. For some reason, Andrew Cuomo still cannot be bothered to respond to the Freedom of Information request filed in August that said, hey, how many nursing homes patients actually died? Because we don't know. He still hasn't released that. The 6,300 number is utterly wrong, and we know that. That's not even a debatable point either. It's wrong. He won't tell us how many. Do you think it's because it's lower? I kind of doubt it. I think it's because
if it was good data, he'd be screaming it from the mountaintops.
Right. If it was average data, he would have already released it. It's got to be awful because they signed an order that said, hey, we're going to not overwhelm hospitals. So if you're in a nursing home, go back to the nursing home as long as you're just getting treatment. So he sent contagious people back into a nursing home that didn't have proper protective equipment. Guys, this was an unforced error. This didn't need to happen. There was other places you could have put them.
Yeah, and did you read the Wall Street Journal article that I sent? Was that this week or last week? They were basically they were saying they were putting people on ventilators not for the benefit of the patient themselves, but to try to minimize a potential spread within the hospital.
Yeah, because they didn't think there was any difference in result, but they were afraid that if they didn't ventilate, they were more contagious. So they didn't anticipate that putting people on a ventilator was going to kill them. It's not like they were practicing human sacrifice. But goes to our point of the show, which is this is what happens when you make decisions out of fear instead of out of what you're actually witnessing on the ground and seeing real data and seeing both sides of it, good and bad. Look, you could tell me I'm dangerous and that I don't know what I'm talking about or whatever else. Look, I've read the studies that are saying it's all doom and gloom and scary, and I've read the studies that say, hey, this isn't as bad and this isn't it. If you haven't seen any information whatsoever showing that the mortality rate for people under 70 is infinitely smaller, or that pre-existing immunity exists, or that masks are not all that effective at preventing the spread, or that the viral load, if all of this sounds completely foreign to you, do you think it's because you're so much better informed than me, or do you think it's because you're getting your sources from one side and you're not even thinking about the other? Honestly, what do you think it is? Because I know the answer. And I know that I will look at every study, no matter if it supports my argument or if it's against it, because I understand I have biases just like everybody else. And I understand that I am now like on a team here and I want my team to be right, but I still make myself read the other side. Number one, so that I can understand if it's right or wrong. And number two, I'm at a point where I can at least understand when something hits my ear wrong and I go, wait, that doesn't line up with any of the data that we've actually seen. There's something wrong with that, or it's a 90-degree turn away. Because this is, I can't tell you how much I feel for business owners and people that are out of work and how many people we have put in poverty. Like the effects of this, based on our faith and trust in government, politicians, and bureaucrats, is insanity to me. And I have a very small platform here, but I will use this platform for as long as I can to point out, this is nuts. We have to stop this. We are harming people as much as you like. Nobody, how many times has the news gone around to show the small business owner now struggling, 3 months behind on rent, 3 months behind on mortgage, unable to pay anything?
No, they'd rather show them having a bunch of people in their building too close together.
Right. I'm doing the best I can to remain objective, and I force myself to read the other side of this whenever I can, because I think that's the only way we're ever going to understand this. And I'm also well aware. I know we're coming long on time, and I apologize. This is a tangent even for me. So there's a study done. I'll get the name of the study, and I'll talk about it next week. But on how people would rather not stand out from the crowd. So they did this study decades ago, and then they've recreated it multiple times, and it still holds true. So just be aware of this. They take one picture that has a single line on it. Then they take another picture. It has 3 lines. One is shorter than the first line. One is the same size as that first line, and the other one is longer. And it's not really close. It's not absurd, but it's not really close. It's pretty obvious. So they have people stand across the room and they hold up and say which line on the second picture is the same as the line on the first picture. And everybody gets it right. So then they do the actual study, which is they have their own people involved in the test go in front of the test subject, which would be, let's say, you. And all 7 people give the same wrong answer ahead of you. All 7. And then they want to see what you would do to say, okay, well, you just agree with everybody else. 10 out of 10 got it right when they went first or second. But now with 7 people go first and they all get the same wrong answer, what do you do? Guess how many people gave the wrong answer? Now, I don't want to say knowingly, but gave what was obviously a wrong answer just because the 7 people in front of them did. How many people out of 10?
I don't want to guess, but I want to know the answer.
9. 9 out of 10 people looked at those 2 lines and said, yeah, no, it's the first one. That's the same height. Knowing it was wrong, at least on some level, or just doubting that they understood it well enough or whatever else. That is how strong our need for conformity actually is. 9 out of 10. They've done this at Ivy League schools. They've done this with general population. They've done this with professionals. It doesn't matter. Somewhere between 8 and 9 out of 10, almost every time this study is done, will agree with the 7 people ahead of them just to not give the wrong answer.
Crazy town.
That's insanity. Like, look, again, we all want to think we're the 1 out of 10. We're not. Sorry, guys. You're probably in the 9.
That's crazy.
Right. So that's my point in all of this is why you have to go and look at the information, because otherwise you will absolutely just go along with what you on some level think or know is wrong just to not get away from the crowd, because you will doubt yourself. You will think they must see something you don't see. So you'll ignore what you know is right because of that. So if you know that's the case, that gives you a much better chance of getting to some level of objectivity and coming up with a better decision than what we're doing right now.
And so a couple people who did exactly what you're suggesting, go look at information, is going to be our guest interview, Greg Morin. He is he's got a PhD in organic chemistry from Notre Dame, but he has done exactly what you said. He looked at all the studies on the masks as he was going through and looked at them all, took his training as a scientist and applied it to those papers, and we talk about all that about masks. At the risk of publicizing another show, Joe Rogan,
yeah, he really needs our help.
You're sorry welcome, for shilling for Joe Rogan, but you guys should go listen to the interview he had, I think it was on the 26th, with Alex Berenson. So if you're listening to the show, maybe you know who Alex Berenson is. If you don't, I would start paying attention to him. He has probably been the most outspoken reporter against COVID, the masks, the restrictions, the vaccine, everything. He's a long history. He's, former New York Times reporter. But anyway, he's doing his own thing now, and he has all in on COVID, and he is on the Joe Rogan show. It's a 3-hour interview. The information is from beginning to end. So at the risk of having you guys jump ship and go like Joe Rogan more than us, I would tell you to go watch the Joe Rogan show with Alex Berenson for sure.
And listen,
did you see any of it yet?
Yeah,
okay.
I've started. I haven't finished it yet, but I've been listening all along. Listen to Greg Morin. It's the same thing. Like, look, it's what we've done, except he is a scientist and understands this far better than we do. Like, we have a basic understanding. He's looking at it, and these are the people. Like, look, this is my point on science: is you act as if scientists are all in agreement on anything. That's completely nonsense. Of course, there's differing points of view, and if you're not hearing the differing point of view, there's probably a reason. Either you're not looking for it, you don't want it, or it's just not being presented to you. But either way, you might have to put some effort in to find it. He is a great resource. He obviously knows his stuff. Some of it did go a little above my head, admittedly, but the idea being the same on, look, this is how a scientific study should work. This is what we're seeing with these studies, and these are the concerns. It's not like it's a definitive thing, yay or nay. It's this is problematic, and this is what we should be able to see.
Right, and he kind of points out, he's like, I saw these articles, saw these papers, started clicking on the links and started going through, and he basically says bells were going off in the wrong way. So I will bring on Mr. Morin here. Mr. Hussong, anything else you would like to leave the folks with other than just a Happy New Year to everybody, but like any 2020 closing arguments?
Nah, just let it die.
Yeah.
just let it die.
I'm with you on that. So all right, so without further ado, let's bring on our interview, Greg Morin, as we talk about all things COVID and masks. I want to welcome to the show a scientist with a master's degree in chemistry from Emory University and a PhD in organic chemistry from Notre Dame. He has spent this past several months researching the literature on the efficacy of masks. Ladies and gentlemen, Greg Morin. Mr. Morin, thank you for joining us and taking some of your time to Sports, Clicks, and Politics.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
So we brought you on to talk about masks. Why don't you decide why you kind of went down the road of trying to determine the efficacy of masks, and what did you find when you? I want to welcome to the show a scientist with a master's degree in chemistry from Emory University and a PhD in organic chemistry from Notre Dame. He has spent this past several months researching the literature on the efficacy of masks. Ladies and gentlemen, Greg Morin. Mr. Morin, thank you for joining us and taking some of your time to Sports, Clicks, and Politics.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. Appreciate it.
So we brought you on to talk about masks. Why don't you decide why you kind of went down the road of trying to determine the efficacy of masks, and what did you find when you did that?
Okay, well, yeah, kind of the background is being a scientist. I have the background to understand the scientific method and the process, and basically I just became really irritated listening and reading all of the stories in the media about listen to the science, and the science says this, and it by and large was pretty much always just parroting a specific headline and not really demonstrating any real understanding of how the scientific method works. So often you'll see, I would read these articles saying, the case has been proven, masks work, and such and such study showed. I'm like, okay, well, let me click on that. So I click down to study, and then the study will link to some other article on some other website. And so I keep continuing to click down, and eventually you work down to the actual literature paper. And so I start reading some of those, and I became pretty astonished. One of the first ones was the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science article, where they were pretty much trying to demonstrate early on, saying, well, clearly the mask worked because we see that if people hadn't worn them, so many more people would have died. And right off the bat, my alarm bells go off. I'm like, wait a minute, how are you making this determination unless you have access to some alternate universe I'm not aware of? How did you do this? So I read through the paper, and it looks, it's very scientific, looking at appearance, and they use all the proper lingo and everything. But basically at its core, what it was is, well, we extrapolated what this line was going upwards, and we assumed it would continue to go in this particular direction. And then there was a mask mandate in these particular areas, and then it was lower. So therefore, we'll just look at the difference between what we thought it would have been and what it actually was, and that demonstrates our case. I'm like, that is not science. Okay, maybe that's an analysis, and maybe you could call it a study, but it's not a scientific study, and it doesn't demonstrate any sort of evidence for that particular side, because it's very easy to manipulate any type of those models or correlations to get the output that you want. It's very easy to just kind of adjust and tweak numbers here and there, and suddenly you get the output that you want. So that was extremely frustrating, and really my jaw dropped when I read that. I could not believe that was basically the level of analysis, that they were strictly going on a viewpoint of, well, the line is going up, and we assume it will continue to go up in this direction. And the only reason it went down is because of these particular methods that we put into place, completely ignoring epidemiology, that these outbreaks always go up and they always come down in a sort of standard curve. There are Hope-Simpson curves. There's normal seasonality curves. They always talk about that you're going to have this exponential growth, and that it's assumed it's just going to go on forever, upwards and upwards and upwards. Well, obviously that's not going to be the case, because based on those models, pretty much the entire planet would be infected with this within a couple of weeks or a month. So that obviously on its face didn't make any sense. So I continued to look at some of the other studies, and some of them, the other type of study fell into the category of a mechanistic study, so where they would look at the ability of particular mask or mask type to minimize the exflow or inflow of particles of a certain size. And all the methodology is perfectly fine, and they showed what they went out to show. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not real world in the sense of, yes, in a lab I can show that I can take these particles and move them through this mask, and I can detect a lower level on the other side. And yes, that is true, but what happens is in the media, they'll take a snippet from the conclusion saying, well, this demonstrates that this may possibly be efficacious. And they'll say, yep, it shows that this is going to do this. And it's like, well, no, you're really taking it out of context. And so in that situation, it's really not so much a problem with the science, it's just more a problem with how the media interprets what they're reading. And by and large, I don't think any.
If I can jump in there, do you think that's just a lack of awareness on the media part, not knowing what the questions to ask? Or, I mean, I don't know. Are they just like playing fanboy?
Yeah, I think it's by and large, they just do not have the science background at all to even begin to understand the scientific method. So if you haven't taken these classes in college, which I assume some of them have, but it's probably been years since they did it, and it's probably not taught in a way, it's really not, often the science classes in college, high school are more focused on method. Okay, well, here's a formula, and we plug in numbers, and it tells us, the rate of, acceleration of gravity, or we do this experiment with the chemistry, and we mix these two chemicals together, and they react, and we get this. And so, okay, you kind of understand the methods, but you're really not understanding the scientific method of coming up with a hypothesis and then determining how would you test that hypothesis. So you're going to make a prediction, and then you're going to go in the real world, do the experiment, and then compare that to your prediction, and does it meet that or not? And if it does, then that's evidence for your case. And if it doesn't, then you need to either discard the hypothesis or you need to make an adjustment to it. And probably going to kind of skip ahead a little bit, but that's a lot of what is going on right now in the media. It's kind of shifted away from the scientific studies, which really came out earlier on in the pandemic in May and June, when people were trying to sort of find a pretext to say, well, we really should wear the mask because the science shows that these are efficacious. We're now more in the phase of, okay, well, you said they were going to have this effect, so let's look at the real world data across different countries, states, counties, however you want to break it up, and look and see, do we see a difference between those that implemented these policies and those that did not, those that self-report higher levels of mask use versus those that report lower levels? Do you see an effect? And by and large, we do not see the effect that you would expect to see if masks had the protective abilities that are claimed. So basically, the idea in science is that you put the hypothesis forward and it's falsifiable. So that means you can come up with some type of experiment that will conceivably show it to be true or to be false. You can't have a hypothesis where it's impossible to ever get a false outcome. So in this situation, you can have lots of statistical examples where you compare, well, this region had a mask mandate and then we see that the cases dropped. And then this one had another one and we see the cases dropped. Well, okay, maybe not. As we all know, correlation is not causation. And as we all know, these outbreaks follow a standard dropping curve. And so you have to take that into account as well. But let's, for the sake of argument, say, okay, fine, you put it in and it dropped. And you can have 1,000 of those. All you need is one that shows that that was not the situation. All things being equal, of course. And you have to discard that hypothesis because it's falsifiable. It doesn't matter if you have 1,000 things showing it to be true. If you have one that shows it's not, then it's not. So the kind of a fun example I've used recently is that it's like the rooster crows at dawn. And you can claim, well, the rooster crowing is what makes the sun rise, and you can have all kinds of experimental results. Here's the sun rising, and I hear the roosters crowing over and over and over. See, every single time I analyze it, I see that the rooster crows and the sun rises. You only need one time to have a situation where there's no roosters crowing and the sun rises, and you have to completely get rid of that whole hypothesis. So that's kind of the situation that we're in right now. But it's very difficult to get that message across in the media because every time you point out, okay, well, this doesn't show it, and there's literally, I'm sure you've seen them, hundreds of these charts on Rational Ground and on Twitter from various proponents of against the mask that kind of are very eager to underscore this and put that data out there. But the media will always cherry pick. So they're the most, probably one of the more famous ones is the Kansas one, where they compare these two Kansas counties. And Kansas County had a mask mandate, and then they show this downward sloping line. And then you look at it, and it seemed very odd at first. It's like, well, the line sloping down for the mask counties really wasn't that much of an effect. But then later you find out they had actually cut the graph off at the highest point. So basically for the non-mask and mask counties, they were low, and then they both rose in unison. And then 14 days after the mask mandate for that county, then they started the chart to show that it was sloping downward. But even with these things, the effects are very, very small because you're talking about differences of 1 or 2 cases per 1,000 between these two counties. So it's, they really have to kind of really dig in and find the smallest little correlations and then claim that this is it and this proves it.
So looking at this, I'm so glad that hearing you say this because I'm not a scientist. I actually went and read those studies and thought the same thing of like, wait, this isn't science, at least not how I've always treated science. And one of them was the lack of falsifiability was just insane to me of like, well, yeah, you're going to get this result every time. There's no way for you to be wrong. And the other one that really tripped me up was it seemed like a lot of these just took such a myopic view of the question of, well, we studied this, and it shows that if you put a mask on and cough, the droplets don't travel as far as if you don't have anything over your mouth and cough. And I stared at that study, and I went, somebody paid for this. Somebody actually paid for us to determine this. Right. And then the result was it got cited on the CDC website as one of the studies that show masks work. And then you get into the question of, is it via aerosols? What happens to the particles when they get into the mask? Do they just die? How often should we be changing out our masks? You've obviously done some more research into this. What's your overall takeaway on how effective are masks, and what does that mean for what we should be doing in our day-to-day lives?
Yeah, excellent question. So that actually leads into another paper. I want to cite the name. It came out in Science Reports, Efficacy of Masks and Face Coverings and Controlled Outward Aerosol Particle Emissions from Expiratory Activities. So they actually looked at a variety of different types of masks and their ability to limit particle outflow depending on the activity of the individual, whether they were breathing or talking or coughing. And as one might expect, the masks had an effect on that. That makes sense that would occur. But what was interesting that I found at the end of the article, and because they're very honest about this, they're being very scientific about it. They're saying we did this and we saw these effects, but these are things that we did not look at. These are things that were confounding our ability to analyze the data. One of them that they pointed out had to do with the cloth masks actually had more particles coming out of them than without a mask. And I basically said that's most likely because the actual material on the cloth is coming off. It's the little dust particles are coming off, so it made it impossible to really analyze that closely. But what they suggested, which made sense, is that it's very possible that the masks, depending on the type, could be a potential vector for the virus that would actually enhance the distribution of the virus. So if you think about it, the masks, okay, say they do exactly what they're supposed to. You put it on, and all your breath is going straight out to the front. None of it's going out the side. It's perfectly fitted. Okay, so it's going out there, and it's catching these particles. These particles do not vanish into an alternate universe. They are still on the mask. So you have viral particles. So assuming that you have it and you're infectious, and the virus itself is going to land on the mask, or if it's inside of these aerosolized water droplets, that's going to land on the mask. Those droplets are at some point going to very quickly evaporate. And what you're doing is, so even if you have a very low level of it in your breath, you're concentrating it in one single point on that mask. And then it's going to build to a certain level at which your breathing will then start to push it out from the other side. And so the mask only has utility for a certain period of time, assuming that it has this utility as claimed. It's only going to be for a certain period of time until that occurs. And we don't know how long that is. I don't believe anyone's looked into that. So we could very well be making it far worse because you've taken something where if you were walking around, breathing, talking, it was being dispersed at a very low concentration, and now you've concentrated it into one spot. And now as you're speaking, you're aerosolizing it like a small, can aerosolizing it throughout the environment. So I think that and among there's many other reasons why the masks are not having the effect that we believe they should be, and that's just one. That's just one that's people aren't really considering, and I think that's why a lot of these. It is odd though. I found it interesting that in a lot of the country level, state level data, when you look at it, usually you don't really see an effect, but even when you do, the ones with the masks always have a slightly higher caseload than the ones without. And I'm almost wondering if that's part of what we're actually seeing, that the effect is there, it's minimal, but it's there. And so to the extent you may have any benefit from a mask, it's being completely neutralized by the fact that it's not the proper type. So if it's a cloth mask, the particles are being dispersed right off of the mask, or if it is the right type, you're not exchanging it often as you should. I mean, it's in a hospital setting, medical staff are told to basically change those masks very, very frequently during the day. So it's already well known that, you go into a room with a patient, you take that mask off, discard it, and get another one. And you have people wearing these things all day long, and that's not going to really help the situation. If anything, it's just going to negate any benefit that it did have.
Yeah, it seems to be less than optimal to wear the exact same piece of cloth over your face for 8 hours.
Right.
And you in one of your articles on porcupine musings, you used the word that I absolutely love, and that was equivocation. And it does seem to be what is happening, is by never having to exactly define what the end game is of masks, there's no falsifying it. You can never be wrong by saying, see, masks work.
Right.
And I don't know what it is about this that I'm expecting or hoping for, but can you speak a little bit on what you're seeing from the scientific standpoint of this issue of equivocation?
Yeah, well, the equivocation, that gets back to the original point with the actual scientific literature, where they can make a factually true statement, masks work, because we're not defining what we mean by work. So if we say masks work, and we mean, well, they decrease the number of particles emitted by a wearer per unit time when worn this way, yes, that is true. That is a factual statement. So if that's how you want to define it, fine. But what is implied, or what is meant when it's used in the media, is that they work to limit the spread across the entire society or group of people that are wearing them, in order to limit or halt the spread of the particular disease, in this case, the coronavirus. And so people just hear work, and so they assume, well, everyone's telling us to wear them. That must be what they mean. So you go away with the belief that I read something, it said a study showed they work, that's all I need to know. And so that's where the equivocation comes in. So if you were to really press on any particular party about this, those in charge that are making these rules, and say, well, they can say, well, no, we know it doesn't do this, but we know that the literature says that it works in this particular way. So, we were being factual, just not truthful, which is something Michael Malice always brings up. So I think that's, it's an excellent point. That's how they kind of get away with this. No, we didn't mean that. We meant this other thing. But very often, even if you do suggest, that the work means that it limits the spread through society, they'll still claim that, because I've seen that in the New York Times, where they will cherry pick some particular locale and say, well, here's a mask mandate, and we see that it comes down, and clearly it shows that the masks work, and they just move on from there. So that's kind of the state of the science right now, is that you can pick out particular scientific articles that will indicate, yes, this had this effect. And actually, there was just one today I was rereading to get ready for this, and I was sort of astounded because it was a detail that I had missed previously. So it was, and I think this is one of the common ones that was cited early on, respiratory virus shedding and exhaled breath and efficacy of face masks. And this came out in Nature Medicine in May. And they actually looked at coronavirus, influenza, and rhinovirus, and they compared groups of individuals with a mask, without a mask. They had them breathe into a machine that measured particles above 5 micrometers and below 5 micrometers, and they looked at detection of the virus in those particles as well. So it was a very thorough study. But two of the problems that it has is that they make the claim that, yes, the masks may help you if you are trying to deal with an ill individual. So they do point that out. Ill, somebody who is symptomatic, basically. So if you're asymptomatic, there really is no point at all to the mask. So they're clear to kind of set that context that it could possibly be efficacious for someone who is ill to limit the spread. However, the data set, they're on really thin ice, in my opinion, because the number they started with a population of over 200, but it basically ended up getting winnowed down to 10 people in a group measuring with the coronavirus above 5 micrometers and 11 individuals below 5 micrometers. And so even among those individuals who were infected, they were symptomatic when they breathed into these machines. For the above 5 micrometers, I know I'm getting a little weedy.
That's all right.
No, do it.
Yeah, I'll try to get through a little quicker. For those individuals, 70%, they couldn't even detect the virus. And these people were infected with it and symptomatic. So basically 3 out of the 10, they detected it. And then when they put the mask on, they didn't detect it at all. And then for the other size below 5 micrometers, 4 of them, they could detect it out of 10. And then they put it on, they couldn't detect anything. So clearly, okay, we went from 3 to 0, 4 to 0. That showed something. But the difference between the two is that the p-value for the 3 to 10 is basically not significant, meaning it doesn't really demonstrate that the masks did anything above chance. But for the other one, 4 out of 10, it was significant. So it was 0.04, and 0.05 is considered to be the limit for statistical significance for these types of studies. So the difference of one individual is what made the difference of this being perhaps efficacious or perhaps not. Now, the other and real quick thing that I had not noticed previously was that they said it's coronavirus. They weren't testing SARS-CoV-2. The data that they collected for this went back from 2013 to 2016. So they were testing for HCoV-1 and influenza and rhinovirus. So the point being that mask use for influenza and for rhinovirus showed much less efficaciousness. And for rhinovirus, basically, literally nothing happened. The rhinovirus didn't right to the mask. I mean, there was a small decrease, but it was, a minor difference. And influenza, it was mixed. So basically, the point is there is a difference between the type of virus and the extent to which a mask can make an effect. So that's an important point. How different is SARS-CoV-2 from SARS-CoV-1? I don't know. Has anyone looked at that? It's not, there may be a paper out there and I have missed it, but just based on this, it is interesting because this type of paper is used to say clearly the science shows, and that they looked at the virus and it showed that it lowered it. Yes, that's all true, but you weren't looking at the exact same virus. Probably, yes, it would have some type of effect because we saw an effect with the influenza as well. But it's still a point that's not brought out in the media. The media just hits on the conclusion that they said, well, it shows that this may be efficacious, therefore it's proven, and they go on. And so I think that's where the media really fails. They need to bring up these other points and put that into context so that the reader can see that, yes, okay, there's evidence for this, but it's not as open and shut as they would try to want you to believe.
And so are there any studies out there that are worthwhile that you would use as hey, this is some good information here? The Dana study gets brought up a lot for both sides of the mask debate. Do you have any insight on that or any specific study that you would recommend?
Not offhand. I mean, yes, the Danish study that just came out recently, and I think that certainly was a evidence in the side of the masks really aren't doing anything. It showed a small effect, but within the error range of that study, it basically could have shown that the mask made it worse as well. So I think that kind of is another bit of evidence for the camp of the masks aren't doing anything. That the null hypothesis, which is the term scientists use for basically showing that, well, this is what our default position is. The default position is you have a respiratory disease and you have masks, and the idea that the mask is going to have any effect, it will not have an effect. That's the null hypothesis. We don't expect it to have an effect. So to show that it has an effect, you have to provide evidence with adequate controls that show that is the case. And in every situation, in real world, we don't have the controls. That's part of the problem. So we do have some sort of, we do have like the Danish studies, and we have, there was also a recent study, or not study, but I guess it was an article about a group of Marines that they looked at, and they isolated them in the barracks, and they were under strict quarantine. They wore masks, they washed their hands, they did everything. They were tested before they came in, they were clear, and after, I think it was a month, 2% of them had SARS-CoV-2. And that was a very good study because they looked at the genetics of the virus, and they could see where the outbreaks came from, and it showed that it was significant for basically the spread of it was that if people are close together, if they're the roommate or in the same platoon, it was more likely than not that's where they were going to catch it from. And so that doesn't necessarily disprove that masks don't do anything. You could say, well, it might have been worse. Yes, it might have been, but it doesn't provide evidence that the masks work either. And so that's usually where the mask work people kind of come in. They'll say, well, we're sure it would have been worse. Well, maybe not, but you're going to have to redo that with a group of platoon of Marines that didn't do any of these things or did everything but the mask. That would have been stronger evidence. But as far as I'm aware, that hasn't been done yet. And I think that's usually cited, ethical reasons are cited. It's like, well, that wouldn't be ethical to do because, it's impossible that somebody could die. Okay, yeah, maybe. But, they do vaccine trials and you have informed consent for those. And it's very possible, there's not a zero risk that you could have some type of effect from that and die. Now, I don't know if anyone, I think some things were reported, but they always said, oh, no, it had nothing to do with that. It had nothing to do with the vaccine. Just move along. We don't need to look at that. But, yeah, that was a point I was going to make. Yeah. go ahead. You can ask. I've lost my train of thought.
No worries. I actually wanted to add, just as a summary, if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, it seems as though if you can replicate the perfect environment that you get in a study of the mask is fresh, it's right on, it covers properly, or at least, even if it's not an N95 fitted, at least it's doing a better job, and all of the situation can be exactly controlled, masks might help a little.
Yes, it's conceivably it's not impossible, but that would be basically what that, and it's not impossible, but even in the real world, it's still somewhat impossible. And so, for example, there were a couple cases, 2015 to 2018, there was a group of nurses in Canada, in Ontario, and the hospitals that they worked in were basically trying, they wanted them all to take a flu vaccine, and they didn't want to take it. So they said, okay, well, if you're not going to, contractually, they couldn't force them to do it. But if you aren't going to do that, you have to wear this mask, 90 and 95, you have to wear it all day. And they did not want to do that, because if you, and the people have gone on record, but health professionals, if you are properly wearing an N95 all day long, it is unbearable. It's very difficult to breathe. It's not something you want to do. So they did not want to do that. So there was basically a court case, and it went to arbitration, and they had evidence on both sides. And the arbitrator looked at all of the evidence and basically came to the conclusion was there really isn't any strong evidence that shows they really do anything. And it even came up again 3 years later, and that arbiter actually went even further and said the preponderance of evidence shows that the masks don't do anything. And
wow,
the studies he was looking at were in healthcare settings where you had people who are highly trained, they're wearing them properly, they're doing all the right things, and they're surrounded by sick people. So it's under the highest level of stress, and it basically showed that there was really no effect there, and so there was no point in basically wearing them all day long. Yes, if you're going in the room with someone who is sick and they're coughing, whatever, yes, obviously put it on, but you don't need to wear it all day long. It's not going to have an effect at that point.
Yeah. And just so everybody understands, this preponderance of the evidence is a very low standard. Most people think of court cases as reasonable doubt, which means almost certainly. All they had to show in this case, if it was preponderance of the evidence, is a 51% chance that the masks were effective. 51 out of 100. That's it. You just need to show it's more likely than not. So that's a low bar to hit too, legally speaking.
Well, yeah, and he was saying the preponderance of evidence showed that they didn't do anything. So,
right. He couldn't even get to 51 that showed that it was helpful.
Right.
That's crazy.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry.
So basically, the point is, even in those real world environments where everyone knows what they're supposed to do, where you would expect you should certainly have an effect, we're not seeing it. So I guess I could say, theoretically, in an ideal world, perfectly fitted respirator, rubber seal, you've got the most size exclusionary filter material on that, and you're wearing it all day long, and every human in the entire country wore that. Yeah, I would expect that you probably would see some type of effect. But that's not realistic. That's like suggesting, well, we can just get rid of prisons and cops if people would just stop committing crime. Well, I don't understand. If people would just stop committing crime, it would just happen. So it's kind of the same thing where they're saying, if people would just wear these masks properly and change them every 10 minutes like they're supposed to, and everyone had access to an N95 and wore them properly and discarded them when they were dirty, and like you're expecting people to behave like angels, and that's just not realistic. So if that's not realistic, then why don't we use that tool, the mask, in a way that would be realistic and would actually have a benefit? And that's something I brought up in the past, which is basically the mask should be a marker for people you want to stay away from. You should wear the mask if you're sick. You should wear the mask if you're at risk. And so when you see people like that in public, what are you going to do? You're going to social distance automatically. You don't need anyone telling you that. I'm going to stay far away from this person because I don't want to get sick. And they're wearing the mask. That's telling me that they're probably sick, or they're worried about this. And I'm going to be polite. I'm going to stay 30 feet away. And incidentally, I've seen the research on that where it basically indicated 30 feet is the proper social distance that you want to keep, not 6 feet, not 5 feet, whatever. In Europe, it's 1 meter. Here, it's 2 meters, 6 feet. These are completely arbitrary numbers. Whenever you see nice round numbers, that means some politician just pulled that number out of his ass. It has nothing to do with science at all. And so if you look at the actual science, it's 30 feet. Well, that's impractical, so we can't do that. So we just tell people 6 feet.
So wait, are you going to tell me next that President-elect Biden's wish for 100 days of mask wearing is an arbitrary number pulled out of nowhere?
No, that's based on science, actually. He got that. No. And I just want to say to him, it's like, well, we've already done this for 100 days.
Right. Yeah.
And the level of mask compliance, I even was astounded when the recent article I posted, I pulled up the numbers for these different states. I was even astounded. It's 90% plus, 95%. Honestly, I'm actually surprised we're not seeing some type of beneficial effect from this, because the claim is that, okay, they're not perfect. All right, fine, they're not perfect, but we're going to have a small effect. So you would think, so a small effect across a large population, you'll start to see some actual real large numbers there. We don't even see that. It's just astounding that we don't. So that only leads me to conclude is that what I've seen elsewhere cited is that it actually doesn't take a lot of this virus for you to get infected. So in theory, let's say it's just one viral particle. If it's just one viral particle, then the masks are completely useless. They're not doing anything at all because they're not perfect. So it's like saying, well, if I get wet, I'm going to die. So I probably shouldn't go outside with a cheesecloth umbrella. Yeah, it might soak up some of the water, but if I get one drop of me and I'm dead, then it doesn't really matter. So if the same sort of standard is in place for this virus, and you can get it from a handful, then there's no point at all. So if there's no point in everyone wearing it, then why don't we at least do something that might potentially have some effect, which is to mark those that are, sick or are concerned about this and give them wide berth. And that's much more likely to have some kind of effect.
Well, the other thing, you look at a lot of this stuff of, we're not going to get everybody to regularly change out their mask every hour. We're not going to get everybody to not touch their mask with their hands. And if they do, swap it out for another one. Like, this is not the real world. We can't get everybody to wash their hands after the bathroom. I mean, that is the lowest form that you can get. But my question, and this is sort of an analogy I've used of, all right, look at all the mitigation members. If you give somebody a respectable amount of distance, wash your hands regularly, avoid touching your eyes, and practice basic hygiene, and then wear masks on top of it, it seems to me kind of like wearing a bicycle helmet while you're already buckled into a car. Is it safer? Right. Sure. But if you end up dying in a car accident, it's not going to be because you didn't wear a bike helmet in the car. Am I nuts in that? Or like if we just took basic preventative measures outside of masks, hygiene, clean hands, keep distance, if you're sick, stay home, are masks going to have any impact?
The evidence doesn't bear it out. It certainly doesn't seem like it is, because everything points to them having this basically no effect at all.
And a lot of these studies seem to say, like, well, see, it shows that if you do wear masks along with hygiene, hand washing, and distancing, then it has an effect. The same way that Cocoa Puffs is part of a well-balanced breakfast if you eat it with 15 different vitamins and fruits.
Right. Right. And I think that Morin study basically kind of shows your point that no, it doesn't work, because they did that. These are the Marines. This is the military. They're following orders. Do this, do this, do this. They did, I would assume they did everything exactly as instructed. And still there was a 2% outbreak. And 2% is not far below the total number of cases in this country. I think the last I looked at it was around 4%. Okay, it's double, but that was over a month compared over 9 months. So
right.
It doesn't really seem like they had any effect at all. And it makes sense to the extent that if we understand that the coronavirus is part of a class of viruses that are part of the common cold. Common cold is highly infectious, but has extremely low mortality. And so that's what you would expect, and that's really what you want. You want it to spread quickly among the population so that you have that immunity building up through the population, and that is going to limit the spread to those that are going to be more susceptible. And if anything, I think we've made it worse. So even if hypothetically, if we said the mask did work, we're actually making it worse because we're slowing that process down. So that is going to more likely have an impact on those that are more susceptible. They're more likely to encounter someone that has that particular disease.
Yeah, we'll get you out of here after this, because my concern is that people are using these as some kind of a security blanket and a false sense of security blanket. So if these people are at risk, they're more likely to put themselves in situations that they shouldn't be, and more vulnerable situations.
Yeah.
It's a
moral hazard. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's get you out. What did we miss? Let's did we not cover something as thoroughly as we should have? What else do you want to leave the people with?
No, I think we actually really covered everything. The only thing I was going to leave it with was I had the other fanciful example I've used is that probably the closest parallel is between taking the science of the masks and the policy of the masks is a sponge. So you can look at a sponge in the lab and you can say, yes, the sponge absorbs water. It absorbs this much water. And every time we add water, it absorbs it. The sponge is a perfect device for stopping the flow of water. And that is all factually true. That's science. You publish that. That is actually true. But it's a completely different thing to take the leap to say, a sponge will stop my ship from sinking if it sprung a leak. It doesn't translate. You can take this factually true thing over here that is scientifically true, but then to extend it to sort of real world policy or use, that's not the same thing. And that's what we're seeing. And so that's why I decided to speak out, because it just became very irritating for me as a scientist. But also, it seems unfortunately in this day and age, you're not allowed to speak about anything unless you have some sort of specific foot in that particular sector. So
I'm an unemployed bartender. I talk about anything I want. So that's how I roll. So
I also discovered that my college degree and my Juris Doctor results in I'm not qualified to read a study and speak about it. I am not entitled to an opinion on those things. Yeah. So it turns out degrees don't overlap with anything else. I got to stay in my lane.
Right.
Yeah. All right, Mr. Morin, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate the.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye.
All right, I want to thank Mr. Morin again, and I want to thank all you guys for tuning in for a pretty long show.